This video is going to be a discussion slash film study about Derrick Henry and how he can reload or reinvigorate the Ravens run game in 2024. Him and Lamar are obviously not going to play in the preseason. I don't know about you, but I see no reason for either one of them to. I understand that other teams are playing some of their starters. As I record this Friday night, I read some articles today. The Chiefs are apparently going to play some or all of their offensive starters, except I think Jawan Taylor, for the entire first half of their game against the Lions Saturday afternoon, at least from the articles I read today. So I understand that for us as Ravens fans, there's some contrast there. Those guys, however, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, are proven. And the offense under Todd Monken is now in its second year is proven as well, if you ask me. I think the Ravens do have one day of joint practices with the Packers next week. I would expect that a lot of the Ravens starters are going to play in that situation. I think it's next Thursday before the final preseason game in week 3. While watching some of the preseason games in week 1, it caused a couple of thoughts in my head about the Ravens offense in 2024. I had some thoughts as it relates to Derrick Henry. I had planned on doing a video about Derrick Henry prior to the week 1 game against the Chiefs. Sped it up a little bit because some of the plays that I saw in the preseason game, week 1 against the Eagles, that is, and lined up with some of my thoughts and some of the things that I had planned on going over in a Derrick Henry video. It would be the second one that I've done. Some of them are just conceptual thoughts or ideas on how the Ravens can and I believe will attack using him in the run game. But a few of them are going to be very specific in terms of not just where Todd Monken will attack, but when and how. Before we get started with the film study portion of it, credit or shout out to Living Legend, Baltimore-based producer and rapper. He's given me multiple songs to utilize over the years, and the intro song, Light Years, is his work, so I want to give credit to him. Some information about his social media pages where you can find some of his other work will be linked in the description. All right, let's start off with some of the obvious points here about Derrick Henry that I hope can just be accepted by all of us, regardless of what you think about running backs in the NFL, or for that matter, running backs who just turned 30 years old. I think Henry can do anything, and the film says it. The film shows it. Inside zone, outside zone, duo. Yes, the Titans were a big zone team. He's got great vision, and the film to prove it. Across multiple years with the Titans, going back to his college playing days with Alabama, not only has he got incredible vision and understanding of the scheme, meaning the particular play that's being run, in terms of where his potential cut could be, he's really good at adapting mid-play. I think I tried to cover that in the first Derrick Henry video that I did when he signed as a free agent. He's been trained over the years and incorporated those skills. They're natural at this point. It's like a professional fighter who's practiced tucking his left shoulder above his cheek when he throws a jab. He's playing offense and defense at the same time. Henry makes exceptional moves, in some cases very slight ones, in the middle of the play, instantly. The moment, and in some cases, it almost looks like he can see it before it happens. Now, the natural question is, how much will the Ravens run inside zone or outside zone or even duo this year? I have no idea. I do suspect, based on some of the film that we saw last week against the Eagles, that the offense will be intentionally designed to take advantage of everything that Derrick Henry does. And that includes inside zone, outside zone schemes, be it from under center or the pistol. In this video, not going to focus on Henry in the pass game, either as a potential blocker or leaking out in a route. I do think his screen usage is very high level, extremely underrated, in my opinion, especially to the boundary. That last portion of my comment you're going to hear often. If you pay attention to my channel, you probably hear me say that way more often than you would prefer, attacking to the boundary. It's something that Todd Monken believes in, something that I think it's a part of his philosophy, is to run into the boundary. This section of clips here, I'll let it flow through multiple times. It's going to be 11 personnel runs to the boundary, all Titans film from last year, to try to illustrate how directional Monken's attack can be with Derrick Henry, effective into the boundary where you have a tight end. Now, that tight end could be Likely, it could be Andrews. Some people would say it's Pat Ricard. More on that later. I think Monken's offensive philosophy is to force the boundary side safety to roll up. And if you don't do so, he's going to punish you. In the NFL, the hashes are closer together. So there's more room to the boundary. Here the ball was on the left hash. What I'm saying is there's more room to the boundary, to the short side of the field compared to college or NFL football, because the hashes in those two styles of play, or those two levels, are wider. I think if you force the boundary side safety to spin down, it simplifies the potential looks for the quarterback. The boundary side safety is spot shadowed here in all of these plays, except for one where the Ravens, ironically, are in their base defense. I think also it more so constricts or restricts the coverages the defense can play to the field, because you don't have the boundary side safety available in a too high safety look if he's spun down. Again, these are all Titans plays from the shotgun or the pistol, where the design is just to attack the boundary away from the nickel defender. One of these, actually, the one you just saw a moment ago, is technically a pass, because Ryan Tannehill actually threw the ball a little bit forward. Anyway, the idea here is 11 personnel, 3 safeties on the field for the defense, or 2 safeties in a nickel corner. Who cares? It's 4-2-5 personnel, 4 defensive linemen. Maybe 2 of those 4 defensive linemen are actually outside linebackers stand up. Who cares? It's a 4-man front, 2 inside linebackers, 5 guys in the secondary. That's the personnel that will be set with the nickel to the field. The run game to the boundary, I think, is what Todd Monken uses to exploit defenses until they do one of 2 things. Until they either roll up a hard corner into the number 1 receiver's face, keeping the safety back at depth, or do what you see in this play here, which is roll the boundary side safety up, particularly to the single receiver side, but here happens to be tight end into the boundary, just like in each clip. I think that's what Todd Monken wants to force teams to do. It fits right in line. Derrick Henry and his skills fit right in line with that paradigm, if you ask me. Whether it's 11 personnel with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, or Pat Ricard, that is what you can do. Attack to the boundary, away from the nickel defender, where you have an advantageous blocking position because the nickel defender is not there, forcing that boundary side safety to spin down. And if you don't, it'll be death by 1,000 cuts. Now, one thing to say about Ricard, I've addressed this multiple times on the channel, and I'm okay if people refer to him as a tight end. I'm certainly not trying to say you're wrong, but from a positional standpoint for personnel, he cannot be called that. First of all, he doesn't run tight end routes. For me, it really is as simple as that. When we have had situations in the past as coaches trying to figure out what position designation someone is, just look at the routes they run. His appearance in routes is as a fullback. It's in the flats, or it's power pass. There's some delayed releases where he chips on a defensive end, outside linebacker, and then releases out into the flats. Tight ends do that as well. But there's nothing down the field or vertical. There's no seam routes. There's no shake slants like you get from the boundary for Likely. There's certainly no over routes that Mark Andrews has patented at this point. So from a personnel standpoint, in the huddle, before they line up, he's a fullback. So it'll be treated as 20 personnel by the defense. He will not be split out as an X wide receiver, backside of trips, Likely and Andrews are often, nor will he ever be in the slot running a deep out, a dig, or something like that. Defenses will have a heck of a time lining up to all 3 versions of the 11 personnel formations, but from a personnel designation, the platform, when Ricard's on the field, it's 20 personnel. There'll be 3 wide receivers out on the field. I think it's going to create a heck of a lot of conflict for NFL defenses that stay in their nickel. Let's look at 4 preseason plays that line up with what I'm talking about. 11 personnel platform, run game into the boundary. We're not really focusing on the play action concept stuff. Did that in the initial Derrick Henry video that I showed. This is a 3rd and 10 from last week. Of course, we don't have that many starters on the field from a position player standpoint. Number 1. Number 2, the Eagles are not going to roll down the boundary side safety because it's 3rd and 10. They don't need to. A run of 8 or 9 yards, all that does is create a 4th down, likely punting position. But the reason why I like this formation is because it forces the defense to have 3 over 2 to the field. No matter who our receivers are out of 11 personnel, no matter who our 2 guys are to the field, you're generally going to get 3 over 2 to that side over the Twins. And if you don't, there's some things that we can take advantage of. San Francisco 49ers, in fact, late in the regular season, were blitzing this guy often, and Lamar hit Zay Flowers on a couple bubble screens and some hot routes really quick to punish him for yards after the catch. That's why I really like Zay Flowers being here, Rashad Bateman to the same side. But I understand that Rashad Bateman is generally going to be to the boundary. Whether it's inside zone or outside zone, you're talking about you get combo blocks to the 3 technique, and we'll give you the end zone angle here in a moment. Whoever the Ravens have at left tackle or left guard, presumably Voorhees at left guard, obviously Stanley at left tackle, is going to be able to do this. When I say 3 technique, that's what you're going to get when it's nickel personnel and we put a tight end into the boundary. Watch what these 2 D tackles do when the tight end switches sides. The 3 has to travel pretty much because the nickel is away. And if you do it the other way, you've got a 2-gap bubble. So what I mean by a 2-gap bubble is, let's imagine for a moment that this D tackle stayed here in the A gap and this D tackle stayed here. I didn't feel like photoshopping this, so I'll rewind back for a moment. And you're going to have to pretend that 85 stayed right where he is right now. You would end up with a larger amount of space between the D tackle and the outside linebacker with the tight end here. It creates easy run blocking angles. It's 3rd and 10. The Eagles might be okay with doing that. The point is they're not going to be able to play with the 1 technique in the A gap and the outside linebacker lined up outside of the tight end into the boundary with no nickel defender there to support. They're going to get destroyed by pretty much any kind of run scheme. This is a perfect setup to utilize Lamar Jackson as a potential boot and Derrick Henry on some type of zone, outside zone, whatever scheme, into the boundary. Get players moving horizontally and put backside defensive ends, outside linebackers in conflict. It's easy setup for a Todd Monken to install, and I'm quite sure it's been done already. A little bit more unique, a 1-back log play here. And you will see the boundary side safety spin down, walk down. Again, this is preseason film from week 1, just showing you, quote, base offensive plays that are already in that will utilize the running back to attack to the boundary. Wide receiver going to go get the safety who walked up on the motion. Motion kind of tells you that you're probably got to run play to that side. If the safety had stayed here, then this front side wide receiver, the Z, could potentially go get the front side inside linebacker, where we would be forcing the boundary side corner to make a tackle. In this case, I think it's Keely Ringo. And the end zone angle, obviously, multiple people have covered this. I did as well earlier in the week. It's a great job by the left tackle, Jones, to double team on Jordan Davis and then work here and then come back and take 45 in this direction. Widen him up so Owen Wright can make a cut. You saw the plays earlier. You're a football fan. You're a Ravens fan. You've seen Derrick Henry highlights for years, not as many against us, thankfully, as other teams. But point being, anytime you give a running back the caliber of Derrick Henry the ability to cut downhill, he's going to read that gap the same way that Owen Wright did. Beautiful football, 11 personnel run game into the boundary. Been talking about it for years. Switching it up a little bit. 11 personnel run game to the boundary again, but it's away from the tight end. And I discussed this as well. We're using the tight end to arc release here. Potential jet sweep with number 12. Snapping the ball in a manner such that the quarterback's back is turned. Timing-wise, you can see it's well practiced. Almost have a direct line of the tailback, in this case Rasheen Ali, the jet guy, and then the quarterback whose back is turned. They're almost in a direct line together. So some of these second level and third level defenders that stare in the backfield wouldn't have a clue who has the football, and you could get guys out on top of them before they're able to recognize who's got the ball. It's a man situation, so they're chasing across. Additional to that, the edge defender is widening up with Kolar. Or he should be widening up. He actually makes the play. I think that's Hunt, who's a pretty spectacular athlete. But in any case, you're trying to create conflict horizontally with the jet. And the Ravens ran this last year. Hill and Gus Edwards were both really good at it. And then the run concept off of it, potentially hitting front side. Ali cuts it back. He seems like a cutback guy or a bounce guy. and then potentially with the play action to the quarterback in Lamar Jackson. I think I like this play from a Lamar perspective because it protects him, meaning you have one option, the jet, the defense has to defend by alignment or post-snap reaction. Second option, the running back, Derrick Henry, who we're talking about. Lamar becomes almost this third option on the play, even though it's not an option read play. It's a called play action, if in fact Monken calls it. We're going to put people in a heck of a lot of conflict, whether it's Kolar or likely Andrews on the field at tight end or Pat Ricard. Finally, a spread concept, if you will, a little bit more modern out of 11 personnel. Tight end starts off to the boundary. I don't know about you, it's a little bit difficult to watch Keaton Mitchell runs, knowing that he's not healthy right now. Hopefully we get a healthy version of him late in 2024 or in 2025. Tight end into the boundary, almost like a stack twins to the field. Motion the tight end across. Nickel defense. Derwin James playing the nickel. He's going to widen up with likely. Basically, we get a 4/3 to the field by the Chargers. So they've really subtracted one from the box. Lamar theoretically could throw it out there on any number of concepts or give the ball to Derrick Henry, which is what we're talking about. In this case, Keaton Mitchell bursts through, almost takes this one to the house. Ends up being a 28 or 29-yard gain. Finally, the last section of plays here that I want to use to illustrate how I suspect Derrick Henry will be maximized in this offense. I'm going to focus on what I would call split flow. So a fullback in the backfield, Ricard, or potentially a tight end in motion. And some of these go back in time a little bit, to be honest with you. Back to 2022, obviously before Todd Monken was here. Using Ricard as a lead blocker or as a threat to a lead blocker with pulling linemen out in front of Henry the other way. Rather than try to explain it to you, I'll show it to you in a progression. Now this first one, we would call power counter. It's against the Bengals, 2022, the game that we won on a late drive by Lamar down the field to get a game-winning field goal. Power counter because we're pulling two offensive linemen. It is a nickel response by the Bengals. You have corner safety to the boundary, corner nickel here, free safety, so 4-2-5 personnel. Ricard's going to, they're matching up against our 21 personnel that way. So Ricard's going to motion across. Notice you've got Linderbaum as the front side puller for the front side inside backer, and then Moses getting through the hole created by the gap scheme, ends up wrapping up on the backside inside linebacker, gets himself a pancake almost two. It's a beautiful play from the standpoint of overpowering a nickel defense at the point of attack. No matter what the nickel does, we have guys who can deal with it because we're blocking him with the slot receiver. And in the box to the play side, since we've got two pulling linemen and Ricard as a kick-out blocker, I think we're +1 here, maybe +1.5 from a number standpoint. What I'm describing conceptually is a little bit more similar to this, even though for some people this would look like the same exact play. It is not. It's still a pistol set, 2022 at Jacksonville, obviously. Ricard in motion. It's a dual read play, but it's a counter option. So last play, the first one against the Bengals in this section, I called power counter because the two pulling linemen and the two pulling linemen and Ricard were all flowing in the same direction, play side, the bottom side of our screen against the Bengals. Here, Ricard's going to go in motion. He's going to go to what I would call the front side where Lamar is reading the defensive end. Additional to that, you have the same situation, Linderbaum pulling and kicking, Moses pulling and wrapping, and then Gus back here at tailback downhill hitting this 100 miles an hour. So you have this very distinct differential in terms of where you can attack. Derrick Henry behind the pullers, you could run it with zone, or Lamar keeping it behind Ricard. Whether it's 22 personnel, whether it's 21 personnel, 11 or 20, I love the idea. I love the idea of giving Derrick Henry two lead blockers out in front on a counter scheme and giving Lamar, Pat Ricard, to read as a potential blocker. You got an arc release by the tight end as well, which is Mark Andrews, because it's almost a dead giveaway usually that we're reading a defensive end. There were people after this game who were saying Lamar, doesn't read these things, but those things come pre-installed. If you ask me, Lamar has read them so many times. Whether you want Derrick Henry involved in an option mesh or not. We have yet to see how that works out. My suspicion is he's damn good at it, just like he is at everything else. Another example of what I'm talking about, except to the top side of the field, and this ends up being a keep. Dual read by Pat Ricard and Lamar. Counter scheme with the option down here. You can see you've got two pulling linemen. Tailback, which I think is Kenyon Drake, going down the midline. That line's not drawn correctly. It's kind of difficult to draw down the midline from the All-22, but down the midline, and then if he got the ball, he would veer off in this direction down here to the boundary, the short side of the field. Ricard, who had his feet here pre-snap, is reading to the field. He actually tries to hold. I don't think he actually does hold. They're dual reading this defensive end right here. For whatever reason, Lamar chose to keep it. It's Arden Key up there. Lamar keeps it for an 8-yard gain. Isn't a super impressive play from a execution standpoint, because I do think that Lamar could give this football. Number one, this may be one of the reasons why people said he wasn't reading it that game. Number two, Ricard is clearly trying to hold once he gets out here on the perimeter, but the point still stands. Utilizing Derrick Henry to attack behind two pullers and Lamar as a potential keeper behind Ricard. The play action, complementary plays off of that, not necessarily trying to cover here. I'm showing you some Titans plays that attack to the boundary out of 11 personnel that I think Monken can and will implement. He actually has some of them already. And then some old Ravens offense plays that I hope come pre-installed for Lamar at least, and Pat Ricard. Maybe not other guys who weren't around or didn't run the offense as much, that if Todd Monken wants to, he can utilize as well. Really slick design, if you ask me, motioning the tight end from the boundary to the field, pulling a defender with him. In this case, Demario Davis, who's a hell of an inside linebacker, is reading Ricard, so he expands with him. Lamar keeps it. It's not as big of a gain necessarily. Still ends up getting the first down, but the overall point stands in that you've got running back threatening to the opposite side. This is zone scheme by the offensive line. And then Lamar as a potential keeper outside to the boundary or to the field, like you saw on the Jacksonville play, behind Pat Ricard. You can get it done in 20 personnel, 21 personnel, or 11. Some of my thoughts about how the Ravens can attack either A, to the boundary with Derrick Henry out of 11 personnel, or B, utilizing Pat Ricard or Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely. They've executed the dual read in previous seasons as well. So when I say it's pre-installed for Lamar and Ricard, it's pre-installed for those guys as well. Maybe Likely isn't as good at it as Ricard. I suspect that the Ravens' run game might be better in 2024. When I say better, I mean more efficient. It may be more efficient from a standpoint of less on Lamar's shoulders, because you have an absolute stud at running back now that, no disrespect to Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, who obviously went through a ton of injuries the last 2 or 3 years, and other running backs that we've had here. Keaton Mitchell was a blur last year. Derrick Henry's on a different level. He's in a different stratosphere compared to all of those guys. What he accomplished, number one. Number two, how he can take over either parts of a game or an entire game and almost become an offense unto himself. I think the integration of these guys, Lamar, Derrick Henry, and the Todd Monken offense, I think it's going to be smoother and easier to do than than we have any idea. Because how Derrick Henry can attack and dominate to the boundary, I think lines up perfectly with one of the foundational elements of Todd Monken's offense, which I've said dating back to the time when he was hired, and I got a chance to look at some Georgia film. He looked like a guy that wanted to attack to the boundary, force you to adjust there or maybe over-adjust, and then exploit you to the field. I think Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in the backfield at the same time lines up perfectly with Monken's offense and with a lot of what we saw last year in 2023. You guys have to let me know if you agree with my assertions here. I kind of advanced my thoughts and my timeline after watching the first preseason game against the Eagles, some of the base plays that the Ravens use, attacking to the boundary with the run game out of 11 personnel, and it kind of led me down the path of looking at some of the older film of Ricard and Lamar on a dual read situation, stuff that I know is still in the playbook because we saw it occasionally last year, and that you could certainly go to at any time if you wanted to take advantage of it. I appreciate you guys' time. Let me know what you think of the plays that I chose to try to illustrate these points. I really enjoyed trying to make this one for you guys. Not sure I got to all of my points, but I intentionally omitted play action stuff, screen stuff, or Henry being used in pass pro. Appreciate you guys' time. If you think other Ravens fans would enjoy this film study video, look at Derrick Henry and how Monken can utilize him to really reinvigorate and reload the Ravens run game in 2024, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.